Starting a little late, guys. Typical technical difficulties, but we're working things out. And we're really excited because I got a special guest with me today. Mr. Ed Peugh with CLT Buyers, good friend of mine from North Carolina, flew all the way down just to hang out with us here at Directed IRA in Arizona.
Happy to be with you guys. Certainly the opportunity to come sit with you and discuss some of our favorite subjects is not something to be missed. So
me and Ed go back a few years. I ran into Ed from an old client of mine who was self-directing his IRA. I was taking a trip up to North Carolina, and he said if there was one guy that I needed to speak to was Ed. And I'll tell you a little background on Ed. I didn't know Ed. Ed didn't know me. But I was going to North Carolina, and I kind of wanted to check out the town and see what events were happening in the real estate market, you know, real estate investor association meetings and whatnot. It's always good for a self-directed IRA company to involve themselves in that. So I messaged Ed on Facebook, and Ed didn't ghost me. Ed responded right back to this complete stranger that had messaged him. And Ed even offered to meet me out there in Charlotte and show me around North Carolina. And we've been friends ever since.
And here we are.
Yeah, and here we are. And now he's flying down to Arizona to talk about real estate investing. Ed is a full-time real estate investor in the Charlotte area. He's been involved in real estate investing since 2005, 18 years, right?
But not full time that whole time.
Not full time, but that's kind of where you got your start, got things up and running in 2013. And the one thing that I really like about Ed that's similar to what we do here at Directed IRA is Ed spends a lot of time in Charlotte educating anybody that wants to learn more about investing in real estate. And not just buying real estate the conventional way, but buying real estate with all the creative techniques that you can use that we're going to talk about today. Things like seller financing, subject to transactions, lease option. And we're just so thankful that Ed came down here to share this with you guys live. Ed's a great resource if you want to reach out to him afterwards. But without further ado, let's just kick this off and pass it over to Ed. Ed, tell the audience about yourself, and let's just jump into it. And I'll add some filler here and there about how you can do some of these strategies in a self-directed IRA as well. So
yeah,
Ed, welcome.
First, Nate, thank you. It's so fun to see you. We've got to do a lot of really fun things together over the years, and this is yet one more of those things. So I appreciate being able to join you with Directed IRA. You know, one of the things that we've learned to respect so much about Directed IRA is the lineage that you guys have in the business. Obviously, the Self-Directed IRA handbook.
The Bible.
Practically, you and I have talked about how we actually use this to help educate individuals who may be interested in investing with us or doing deals, that this is one of the first things we try and have them work through. And then once they've read it, we'll say, you know, something like, hey, can we go and grab lunch and let's talk about some of the benefits and what the book communicates well is some of the pitfalls of using the funds that are in your self-directed IRA accounts and how you just need to be really cautious about the approach that you take. And that's one of the reasons why a custodian who's super professional is really, really important.
And I just want to touch on what Ed just said, because we were talking about this prior to the show. It's really great when a company like Directed IRA is focused on educating clients, because with a self-directed IRA, we can't tell you guys or tell clients what they should or they shouldn't invest in. But we can provide great education and have professionals like Ed come and tell you the specifics about how certain strategies work, because any real estate strategy that is out there can be applied to a self-directed IRA. But don't rely on your self-directed IRA custodian to tell you how those processes work. You got to lean on the expertise of people that are actually doing it. And we can tell you about all the IRA rules too. But great to have you. And again, this is kind of what clients need, is somebody like yourself to tell them what they can do in their self-directed IRAs.
Absolutely. And so I think our goals today are to share a little bit of what we're doing in the real estate space. And Nate, I'm hoping you'll be able to give a little bit of guidance of how you've seen some clients, both current and past, use these tools really effectively in their business. So without further ado, we can jump right into it. We'll work through our slides and get that set up.
Yep, just give us a sec, guys. We're going to get these slides up so you guys can see them. All real good stuff. And if you guys have questions, by the way, type them into the chat box. Tristan is going to be moderating, and he can relay those questions to us. So you don't have to wait till the end, but we will have a Q&A session at the end of the program. So hopefully you guys have some good questions while we've got Ed here in studio.
Maybe before we get that pulled up and while you guys are waiting, I can just tell you a little bit about who CLT Buyers is. So Nate shared that I've been investing in real estate since 2005. And then in 2013, we started to learn about the private lending. We started to learn about creative financing and some of the tools there. And between 2013 and about 2018, we were using those tools while I was still full-time employed. And in 2018, I was able to go into real estate full-time. And that's really when CLT Buyers started. And that's a business that we work to deploy private investors' capital. We acquire residential real estate, often at a discount. We'll rehab or improve the performance of those properties over time. And then we will often do some type of refinance that allows us to return our private investors' capital and maintain a profit ourselves, and then kind of rinse and repeat all of that in the business. So we specialize in finding off-market opportunities, solving problems. I mean, you and I were joking this morning about some of the problems that we've solved, but everything from a hoarder house that had, that had a live turtle in it to...
I asked him what was the weirdest thing you ever found in a property. He said a live turtle.
But it's not just physical problems. A lot of properties have legal problems, and they have a whole variety of other things. Will this control the slides?
Yep.
Yeah, you just let me know when you want to go to it, and then I'll pull it up for you.
Okay, we can go to it now.
Let's go ahead and go to the slides.
Yeah. So we've talked about who we are. I'd love a chance for anyone who's seeing the webinar to follow us on socials. So we're CLT Buyers on Facebook and Instagram, but we'll share that a little later again. But we'd love you guys to follow us. To be clear, we believe that all effective real estate transactions should have fiduciaries who are representing individuals and protecting their interests. So that, of course, includes an attorney on a title company. I happen to be licensed in North Carolina as a real estate agent. I'm not licensed to give any tax or legal advice. So anything that I'm sharing today, people should immediately discount and seek proper representation in their home state. Okay, so just one last touch about who CLT Buyers are. These are some before and afters, and I picked these specifically because these are some we're really proud of. The house on the left, actually, it's on a street called Moretz. Actually happens to be the property where we found the live turtle. So this is that property, but it was a dramatically... it was a hoarder home that was pretty dramatic as far as how much stuff was in it, and we were able to turn it around and sell it in the market. The individual who purchased it from us actually operates it as an Airbnb today, so that was pretty neat. The second property is on a street called Amity. This happens to be 5201 Amity. Folks can go and look this one up, but did a lot of opportunities to change here, redid the floors, windows, got to put an accent wall in there, show off a little bit of our flair. But the last one is interesting because it's on a street called Lebanon. And this was a property where we made close to $100,000 on this property. But I think the viewers will notice there wasn't much change. The red wall on the first picture and the before is still the red wall in the after picture, and that is to talk about the fact that often it's not actually physical changes that we'll do to the home, but kind of financial engineering that we'll do to structure the deal in a way where we can still make a substantial amount of money even without having to physically adjust the home.
And that's one thing that I'll say that's good about, again, Ed, and if you're going to go out there, I've seen Ed use lots of different strategies. You're not a one-trick pony, they would say. You're not just flipping property. Some property you're holding. You're buying property with seller financing. And just by looking at these images, you could tell 3 very different homes.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that we believe is they say that a a diagnosis without an examination is malpractice, right? So we can't just walk into a situation and say, this is going to be a flip, this is going to be a buy and hold, until we really understand what's the condition of the home, what's the legal situation, what's the financial situation, is it in foreclosure? All of these different things affect the type of deal that we might be able to do. But let's get into the meat of what we're talking about today. Look, we're going to talk about two main things. We're going to talk about seller financing, and we're going to talk about subject twos. And after we're done walking through this, the viewers are going to feel like what we have talked about is actually simpler than what they believe. And what we have found to be true is that the majesty of the deal, or the magic, or the where the deal really comes together, is a lot in like music or jazz. It's when you take these very simple chords or very simple dance steps and you combine them in a creative way that serves what you're trying to express. And that's when the real impact of the deal can get really powerful. So if folks are going to screenshot anything of what we're sharing today, this is one of the ones I would screenshot. As a summary, a seller finance deal is when we take ownership of the property, the deed transfers, and the seller carries a note for some or all of the contract price of the home. That's, if you take the seller finance transaction as a whole and try and simplify it down, that's the framework of that deal. The subject to, on the other hand, we take ownership of the property, and we're responsible for the debt going forward, but that debt stays in the seller's name and will stay on their credit reporting and some other things. And then the lease option strategy, which is kind of the three creative financing pillars, the third one being the lease option, that's when I take controlling interest in a property by entering into two concurrent relationships. I don't know that we'll spend a lot of time on that today. I think we're a little time constrained, so we won't be able to get to that. But it is a strategy we've deployed. And the one comment about lease option strategies is, for those of you who are in markets that may, the upside over the next couple of years may not be as clear, lease options can be a really effective strategy because you can really limit your downside risk in that strategy.
And I would say one thing about all three of these strategies is it doesn't take a lot of money to do them.
It really doesn't. We entered into a lease option once with a $6,000 option fee on a property we eventually ended up selling for 1 point something million. Now, that's not the profit we made. There was debt on the property, obviously, and some other things. So you can get in with as little as like $6,000 in that case. And then specific to the seller finance and subject to transactions, I'm going to show some examples where we got into these transactions for very little and close to zero money. So let's jump into it. Seller financing is a relatively simple transaction. Effectively, this is the same. If you've learned about the relationship between a buyer and private money, the only thing that differentiates this transaction is that the person who's providing the financing, the seller in this case, happened to be the person who used to own the property. And so the seller, they take a note for some or all of the purchase price. To break that down, if we're buying a property for $160,000, the seller may be willing, in some scenarios, to take a note for, say, $120,000. So we'll bring $40,000 and they'll finance the additional $120,000. They give up their ownership of the property, and the interest, their interest in the property, is protected with a mortgage or a deed of trust, depending on your state. As a buyer, we often sit on the buyer side of the table. As a buyer, we take possession at closing. We are responsible for all of the ownership responsibilities going forward. So keeping insurance on the property and taxes and maintenance and all these different things. We're also responsible for the debt payments on the property, but we do get all the rights and responsibility of ownership at closing, right?
It's no different than getting a loan from a bank. It's just the bank. It's not a bank in this scenario. It's the person that owns the property, since normally in these circumstances they own it free and clear.
Right.
And they're just going to carry back a note and receive payments on the remaining, outside of the down payment.
Outside of the down payment.
Which is important because I hear so many people, when I go talk at events, people say, well, I don't have enough money in my IRA to buy real estate. Oh, you sure about that? I just heard him do a deal with $6,000. I've got examples in some of my classes about that amount, even less. So the important thing about everything that Ed's going to be talking about here is that these strategies can be applied to your self-directed IRA. So you don't need hundreds of thousands of dollars in your IRA. You just, in some cases, need a down payment.
Yeah, and in fact, you don't have to go and ask for permission from the bank to borrow the capital. So it's really just a negotiated solution between the seller and yourself. A couple of key takeaways that folks are going to want to look at is these transactions are generally preferred, at least in our world, when a seller's asking us for more cash, then we might be willing to pay them in true cash, right? So if they're asking for $140,000 purchase price, and in a cash purchase, we'd rather be maybe somewhere around 100. Well, that delta we can often make up by negotiating these types of terms. Even when we know that we're going to purchase a property either with our own funds or with lender funds from our private lenders, we still often will negotiate these types of terms as at least a floor for us to be able to move forward in the transaction if for some reason we found a better use for our capital or a better way for us to move forward. Most state forms, people are often surprised to learn this. Most state forms, I've reviewed a lot of them. I can't say I've reviewed every one, but most state forms actually have an addendum that will allow you to list these transactions directly on the state form without any modification. So your favorite real estate agent in your target market can submit these offers for you if you were to ask for their help. There's a last idea about seller financing, which is true really about all real estate purchases, which is when we lock in a purchase with seller financing, we're locking in a price at today's dollars, but we're paying with future nominal dollars, which due to inflation may be worth less. And if folks wanted to read a great book on that topic, there's a book called The Debt Millionaire, which we suggest also to most of our lending partners. A couple of things for folks to look out for as far as our risk mitigation is definitely it's incumbent on us in these transactions to make sure that we maintain a record of all payments. We should make the assumption that whether we're the seller or the buyer in this type of transaction, that we're dealing with a party that may be a little less sophisticated than a traditional bank may be. And if we can maintain a proper record of payments over time, if there was ever to be a dispute, we'll want to be able to provide that. All of the documents for these types of transactions should be prepared by an attorney or title company in the state that is where that target market exists. So, for example, we are pretty active in the Charlotte, North Carolina market. So our attorneys in Charlotte, North Carolina take care of most of these transactions, for all of these transactions for us. And that's still something we strongly advocate, even though at this point we are relatively comfortable, with these documents and how they should read. There's a certain importance to make sure that the attorney's reviewing every one of these documents to make sure that there's not just some small thing that's missed for both our protection and the other party in the transaction.
And Ed, what would you say for the audience members out there? What are some of the scenarios where you find that it's easier to bring up the seller financing option?
Yeah. One place that it just seems like never kind of stops giving is we find opportunities where there are sellers who have been renting properties for a long period of time. They're used to those cash flow payments, but they may not want to operationally go and fix toilets and deal with tenants, and those are folks who are really open to these conversations. It also may benefit them in the way that they may avoid some tax implications if they're to receive the payments over time versus taking one large payment for the sale of properties.
That's a great point. So it's not the house you're buying that they live in. It's maybe a rental property.
Often. Often it's a property.
And we were just talking about an example that I had where somebody took over 3 warehouses in an IRA from a widow who liked the income of the properties. She didn't like dealing with the tenants. And that was it. That ended up being a seller finance deal. That's
such a good example. How you can, and in your example, how you can take, and maybe we can get back to that in some specifics.
But we'll get to that.
How you can get, relatively little amounts of money and relatively very few decisions can really expand pretty exponentially the growth of these accounts. The last point I would share about risk mitigation and seller financing is because you're dealing with individuals, there may be a time where you agreed, I'm going to show an example in a moment, where we agreed to a 20-year note with a seller, but they may prefer to get paid off more quickly. Their situations, 7 years from now may have changed. Their family dynamic may have changed. Kids may be going off to college. There's a lot of different things that can happen. And what we would advocate is that's a great opportunity. While it is a risk, they may approach you and say, hey, we'd really like to get paid off. Of course, from a legal perspective, you're not bound, right? They've contractually entered into an agreement, but it's a great opportunity to have a discussion with that seller and maybe find out where some things can be adjusted. They may take a lower payment to receive a payoff now as opposed to receiving payments over time, or you may be able to refinance them with other debt, or you may be able to go to a more traditional lender. So there's a lot of opportunities that can arise there. And I guess I bring that point up to say this is a conversation you should be very open to having versus, just stonewalling and saying, the note's the note. I don't think that serves anyone's interests. But I did want to share an example of one deal that we have recently done. Folks can certainly look up this address. It's 2214 West 6th Avenue, Gastonia, North Carolina. And this is a property that was being operated as a rental. And the individual who owns it operates a number of rentals. But in any case, we worked through a period of time negotiating with him, and we agreed to a purchase price of $170,000 for this property. To be transparent, if you go on, Redfin or Zillow or whatever your favorite website is out there, that's going to look pretty close to market value for this house. And so someone might say, well, Ed, why are you buying a property at market value? And there's kind of two things that really were compelling to us about this deal. First, you can see that the existing rent was $800. And so the upside to the seller was to say we went from $800 and we started paying him $991. So he kind of gets to get rid of all of the troubles of operational real estate, the tenants' toilets, all that stuff. And he's going to make a little more money, right? Another fourth almost of what he was making. But we saw the opportunity because there's a lot of market opportunity of even increasing the rent further. So we were actually able to push the rent in this case from $800 to $1,200. So that's pretty effective, which, gross cash flows approaches $300. And so if you look at the situation, we were able to get into the deal with actually zero due at closing. And so the whole $169,900 was all financed. So we're putting $100 down as our, good faith deposit, and then everything else is carried into the note. So we're not having to bring any funds to closing. If we're really analyzing this deal, we're technically net positive in month one. And so, do I wish it was more of a cash flow play? Sure. But a note at 7% for the next 20 years, we'll hold that. That'll be fine.
Here's what's interesting about that is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would probably say the beginning investor, the newbie investor might pass on a deal like that because it's not a home run.
Yeah.
Right? It's a base hit. It's not a home run. It's not a fancy, big flip that you make $100,000 on. But, this misses two metrics that are really common out there. So there's like the 1% rule, which is like if my rent is 1% of the purchase price, I should move forward. This misses on that. Yeah.
Then there's the 70% discount to equity. This misses on that.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's a good long-term play. And the point I want to make on that is when you think about your self-directed IRA, because we always want to, gear in the self-directed IRA here. I often see investments that are better suited in an IRA versus personally. And this might be one of them, an investment that you just put on the shelf, I say, right? Where rents cover the mortgage. And maybe 20 years down the road, if you can hold it that long, the renter or the tenants pay off your mortgage for you. That's not something that you might do personally, but Ed does it. But that's an awesome investment in your IRA if you're looking to pass on it because it doesn't have the equity that you're looking for. If it doesn't have the 1% rule that you're looking for, maybe it's a good one in your IRA.
Yeah. How do you give advice to clients who are like trying to make that delineation? Like, how do I know if I put it on the tax protected shelf or if my personal shelf, or like how do I make that decision?
Well, I can't give advice because I can't give tax legal investment advice. But what I would say is, what are your needs? If you're a real estate investor, you can strategize it however you want, but maybe you just break it down this simply. The deals that make me money today, I'll do those personally because I got to feed the family, right?
Sure.
I got to put food on the table. I got to pay for school. I got expenses. But if it's a deal that like buying property subject to, or a seller finance deal where you're just going to do a long-term play where a renter pays off the note for you, and 15 years down the road, you've got a property owned free and clear. Well, with all that upside and the fact that you have to wait, well, sometimes your IRA, you have to wait anyways because you got to wait till 59 and have to take distribution. So just the metrics of that investment fits better with how IRAs work than if I did that personally. But there's a lot of different criteria, but I would just say that. Does it pay you today? Do it in your name or your LLC's name. Does it pay you tomorrow? Throw it in the shelf and throw it in your IRA.
I love that. Have you seen, we were talking about the warehouses. Have you seen clients who have been really effective with seller financing? Is there a specific case that comes to your mind?
Yeah, seller financing, even subject to. When we get to subject to, I'll tell them the story about how I had a client just broke it down real simply. I'm just going to do one subject to deal each year. And after 5 subject to deals, he had $1 million IRA.
That's crazy. Should we go on?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Okay. Next up is subject to. People trip up on subject twos a lot. They're really not terribly complicated. They're not any more complicated than most of the real estate deals that folks are doing out there today. There are a couple of hurdles people want to look out for. So let's talk about that pretty openly. This is a transaction where the debt that is in place on the property, at least some of the debt that is in place on the property, stays in place. And so if Jane and John Smith had taken out some debt to purchase a property and then they want to sell it to us, that debt is going to remain in the name of Jane and John Smith. Often when we're working with sellers who are open to this type of transaction, they're often not in super great financial situations for one reason or another. And so we often will have to offer some amount of money for them to leave the home. We often refer to that as a moving expense in our business, and it's normally on the scale of about $2,000 to $6,000. For those who are thinking from their self-directed IRA account, those would be amounts that might come out of the account. But again, those aren't staggering amounts of money, right? And in our business specifically, those individuals who are in that home must leave the home at closing. We've got some real specific reasons why that's the case, but the easiest of those reasons to share today is just that we are going to need to operate this as a rental. And at the end of the day, those individuals have really struggled to be able to maintain the debt. So it's unlikely they're going to be able to make the payment going forward, the rental payment going forward.
I think one of the most common questions I hear, and I'd love for you to address it, is a lot of people who have not done these types of deals think, why would somebody turn over their house with the mortgage still in place?
Yeah. When we talk about subject to, we often share that this is the best of a worst case scenario, right? Their worst case scenario is that they're going to lose their home and not walk away with any dollars in their pocket. They're going to probably have a full foreclosure on their record. They may try and file bankruptcy. And so all of those things may end up on their credit history. And so this transaction most often is the result of someone trying to avoid those worst case scenarios with something that's a little bit better. At the end of the day, if this seller, they're often a little more neutral from an equity position, because if they could go into the market and sell it, they would.
They would have.
And so there's a couple of really narrow characteristics that really fit this transaction, which is yet again why it's important to walk into a conversation with someone about their home with as many opportunities as possible to understand what's right for them, right?
And I've seen it often with these deals. Sometimes the people in this situation, the sellers, they're, like Ed kind of mentioned, they're between a rock and a hard place. I've seen a lot where they don't have equity in their home, so it's been hard for them to find somebody to sell it because they would have to come out of pocket. Yeah. And if they can't make the mortgage payment, where are they going to get money to short sell it? You know, so they're really in a tough...
Or the type of time that short selling can take.
Or the time, yeah, exactly, the type of time. But like Ed mentioned, you know, sometimes their option B, other than selling it with the loan still intact, option B is get foreclosed on.
Yeah.
And that can bring 7 to 10 years of bad credit. They can't own another home. At least with this deal, they can even have the opportunity to go buy another home.
Almost immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, as long as they're going to meet the underwriting then, and they may have some challenges, and they need to work with someone who really understands the subject too. But our payments are going to need to be documented, and the fact that those payments are being made over time.
Because in most cases, if they are behind on the mortgage payments, you're coming in and potentially catching those payments up, or working with them to catch those payments up and get that problem fixed first.
Yeah, very rarely are we going to find someone where the mortgage is completely current. We have found one or two where they're like, I can't make next month's payment, but I've figured out how to make all the rest. But those things definitely happen. When we're the buyer in this case, we will often require some amount of money as reinstatement. One kind of situational thing we're seeing there is because of COVID forbearances, some of these reinstatements are a little more pronounced than they had been over the last couple of years. So there may be a whole another year of kind of forbearance that's there as a reinstatement amount, and that has been pushing up the reinstatements just a little bit. But we do bring amounts to reinstate the mortgage. We bring it current, and then we take possession at closing. We're responsible for all the debt going forward, and we own all of the rights and responsibilities of ownership. So again, taxes, insurance, all of these things. Generally speaking, these transactions are really that kind of basic. There's one or two things we want to look out for. So we talked about how this can be a solution for when sellers are behind on their payment. We should have an escrow agent complete a limited power of attorney for this property and a third-party authorization that's in the name of the lender. Some lenders are very, very specific about this. We have a credit union back in North Carolina that's giving us a lot of pushback on this issue right this moment. And we've had to submit the third-party authorization 2 times already, and it's been denied. So we're having to submit it a third time. So they have a real specific way they want to see these forms. But that allows us to continue to contact the lender on the borrower's behalf to make sure that we're current with things like escrow accounts, and that as tax rates changes, that we are making sure to change the payment amounts to cover the new taxes and all of the different nuances that come with that. And then the last point we like to point out about subject twos is the most, I want to make sure I say this right. We don't hide the fact that the property is changing hands from the lender, right? It's not something we're trying to obfuscate. It's part of the public record. We don't really have heartburn there, but it may not be in our interest to go out of our way to point it out to them. The most likely way that a lender often will discover that a property has changed hands is when the insurance changes and they're doing an insurance audit. And so it's important that when you're doing these transactions, you get advice from an insurance agent in your market about how to hold insurance on the property in an effective way. We've chosen not, there's probably 2 or 3 different strategies there, and we've just chosen not to point to any one of those because I'm not certain in your situation which is the most effective.
And I don't want to skip ahead, but I know one thing people always ask about with subject to deals is the due on sale clause.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to.
We can go right to it. Yeah, that's actually, sorry. Before we move to that, I did want to point out one thing, which is I've actually just added one of the takeaways of the sub twos in today's market is, interest rates have elevated from historic lows. There are a lot of mortgages that are still at those historic lows that if we could take on would substantially lower our cost of debt across a portfolio over time. And so that's one other compelling reason to look at a subject to and in a real way buy down your debt on those properties. And
just for you IRA nerds out there, I know some of you might be thinking, well, how does an IRA take over a property subject to? Well, IRAs can own property with loans. So we teach this in a lot of our classes. So I teach a class on how to buy property using the leverage of bank financing. So you can buy a property and go obtain bank financing. You guys have might heard this term that we always bring up. It's called non-recourse, meaning any loan that the IRA has on its IRA-owned property has to be non-recourse, meaning it can't be recourse to the IRA and it can't be recourse to the IRA owner. That's what non-recourse means. It means it's just recourse to the property, but it can't be recourse to the IRA owner or the IRA. Well, guess what? When you buy property subject to, the loan already is non-recourse because it's recourse to the initial another party.
Yeah.
So it, by definition, it is non-recourse.
Yeah, exactly.
To the
right.
IRA.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's what makes this such an important tool for folks who have accounts with directed IRA. Let's talk about what is the most common stumbling point, though, and that's, of course, the due on sale clause. And so just to read the due on sale clause in full, this is an example of one that we have found in our mortgage documents. It says, if all or any part of the property herein is transferred without the lender's prior written consent, the lender may require all sums secured hereby immediately due and payable. So what does that mean? It means the lender has the right, if the property changes hands, to ask for all of the outstanding principal in full. That's effectively what it means. Now, just because a lender has a right to do something, are they going to, is really something I think people need to kind of work through and understand. We hear some people ask about whether this is a question of ethics or morality. We really don't view it that way. In a mortgage document, the borrower has rights, the lender has rights, and it's just really a contractual right from our view. And additionally, with now a good amount of experience deploying this strategy, what we have found is that lenders really are not in the business of foreclosing on property. They're in the business of collecting interest payments for mortgages.
Banks don't want houses. Banks want payments.
And as long as we keep the payments current, most financial institutions don't even effectively realize that the property has changed hands. And even those that do don't seem to want to escalate or accelerate the debt when the payments are being kept current.
Right. I think if you guys follow Pace Morby, I think it was Pace Morby who was talking. He does a lot of subject to. He's done tens of thousands of subject to transactions, and I believe the title company that he uses said they've only had the due on sale clause option 10 times out of tens of thousands. So it's about a 1 in 1,000 shot that you'll even have a bank. But again, you got to ask yourself the question, why would the bank exercise the due on sale clause if they're getting payments? If payments are current and payments are continuing to be current, that's really what the bank wants. I think in my career, I've heard one scenario where a bank exercised the due on sale clause, and it was a small bank.
Yeah.
It's small banks who have not a lot of loans that they have to look at. You're not going to hear about this from Bank of America or Chase, but it was a small community bank that probably had 10 loans that they do on mortgages, and they didn't even they exercised it years after.
Yeah.
Title changed, and most likely because there was a ton of equity in the property at that time, so they said, "Why
don't you go this?
Why don't we get?" Yeah. But that's the other thing is if there's no equity in the property, why does the bank want that problem?
That's right. I would say my last real job was with Wells Fargo, and given that experience and some other knowledge that I have about the internal workings of large financial institutions, they just are not well incentivized to make these decisions. And secondly, it's not a decision that's made at like a bank operator level. This is, the highest levels of the banks that have to make these decisions because it actually affects amounts that they have to keep in what's called a bad debt reserve. And there's a lot of related reasons why it's really not in the bank's interest to pursue an acceleration here.
Now, there are some attorneys that specialize on these types of transactions. Would you encourage viewers to seek out one of those attorneys?
As far as like a closing attorney?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For both the seller financing and even more so the subject to, you really want to work with attorneys who are doing this in the target market. Most markets across the nation, there's kind of 2 or 3 shops that are really doing this, and they're normally not the high volume closing, Jane and John Smith's purchase, right? They're not just doing everyday real estate closings. Of course, they're capable of doing that, but they're often the one that investors are already working with today. And folks should ask for referrals in their local markets for those attorneys that are doing them. We've got some great ones in North Carolina.
How much do you come to the table on your average subject to deal? You got to come some money to walk,
yep.
some walk, cash for keys or whatever you want to call it. Some money to catch up the past due payments. Anything else?
Yeah. Let's see. Money for the seller. They're going to want a little bit for their equity if they have some. some amount of money normally for catching up the mortgage and things like that, and then a little bit in closing costs maybe. I would say when we're looking at opportunities, if we go over $35,000 for us, that becomes a little less interesting. We've seen some where to do this strategy, you'd need something more like 70 or 80 grand. Those generally aren't as compelling for us. And we'll try and work out like a cash purchase or something.
I've seen cases. 20 grand be a common number, 20, 25 grand.
20, 25, 30. That's kind of the range.
And the reason I want to mention this is, again, when you're thinking about your IRA or retirement account, that's all you need. You probably want a little bit of a buffer, some cash in case you don't get it rented right away. But you don't have to come up with a full all cash deal to buy the property. And like Ed mentioned, if you're taking over a mortgage at rates 5-6 years ago, or when rates were in the 2s and 3s, that's a great deal, because most likely your rents in the area are going to cover the mortgages and then some.
And then some, right? So at the end of the day, the due on sale clause, yes, it is a risk. Like, we don't get to just be dismissive of, no, that's not a real risk. It's a real risk that I think is substantially overhyped. I don't think that those of us who are operationally doing this in the business today are running into it that often. We have had a handful of times where lenders have even asked us about it, and after kind of some dialogue and some emails, they've basically backed away from making those decisions. And so, as kind of a joke or a kind of a cheeky way for us to say that, we're saying, like, look, more houses were hit by tornadoes, more houses were affected by floods. Heck, more people were stung by bees, and even more people won the lottery that are going to be affected by due on sale, yet none of us are walking around in bee suits.
Well, and there's exit strategies. It's not like the end of the world if the lender exercised the due on sale clause. The example that I mentioned earlier, the only person that's mentioned this to me, that they did have the bank come back years later and exercise the due on sale clause, you know what he did? He just refinanced into a...
That's it.
Yeah, he just got financing from another bank to pay him off.
You can sell.
Yep.
You can refinance. With a bank, you can get a private lender to come help you. Mm-hmm. You could, in theory, pass the property back to the seller and restructure the deal in a way, because the default the bank is seeing is that it's not in the seller's name any longer, right? So if you resolve that defect, that concern, that would go away as well. So there's just a lot of options there, and we're certainly confident in our ability to outrun those options over time. So I wanted to give you guys an example of, we're talking about the amounts that we would need to put into a deal. So this is a pretty compelling one, just to walk people through what we're seeing. This is a property, and you can see the principal amount on the loan was $210,000. For us, we weren't able to, in this case, to come in at $210,000. That would have been a little above where we needed to be. So we actually offered it just over $205,000. So you'll see at the bottom of the contract, at closing, that balance at closing payable to us as the buyer. So the seller actually brought $5,000 for us to close the deal. And you may say to yourself, and again, this is the home. It's a home in good shape. It's not in disrepair. Why would the seller choose to do this? They found themselves in a situation where, to sell on the market, they were going to need to bring like $19,000 or $20,000 to the table. And so they said, look, if we can bring less, then we can stop digging that hole, stop getting more debt out, and start to stabilize things. And that's why they made this decision. In this case, the debt payment was, just short of $1,300. Market rent at the time that we did the transaction was $1,450. Market rent substantially higher than that now. But even coming out of the gate, gross cash flow $150. Yes, I know there are expenses that come out of that, but you're net positive from the $5,000, $150 a month cash flow, and we estimated we had about $15,000 in true equity at the time of purchase.
Can I tell the story about my client?
Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
I have a client who worked at Motorola for many years, a long time ago. He left with not a huge IRA. It's like $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, somewhere around there. And he turned real estate investor. Well, he really got intrigued with this subject to strategy, started applying it in his own investments, and then really started thinking, well, what if I just started doing this in my self-directed IRA? Let me strategize this. And he broke it down real simply. The average subject to deal he was getting, and this is again about a decade ago. The average subject to deal he was coming to the table with about $10,000-$15,000, right? Catch up the payments, give some cash for keys, maybe some minor repairs if the house is in disarray. But he decided to do that instead of use all $70,000 to maybe buy one house. He said, let me splice this up and let me just find one subject to deal a year.
Yeah.
He didn't go crazy. He wasn't online buying and selling stocks. He said, I'm just going to find one subject to deal a year for my self-directed IRA. After 5 years, he had 5 houses owned in his self-directed IRA with only the use of $50,000. Now, that's great because he was just picking up the loans that were already in place. And the other thing that he mentioned too is how he was helping these homeowners get out of a sticky situation too. And getting great property in great areas where the rents covered the mortgage. And it was a long-term play. And again, those long-term plays fit really nicely in an IRA, especially if you've got to wait some years to take distributions. And here's the other thing that is really attractive about subject to, in my opinion, in an IRA, especially if you're going to hold property. A lot of you IRA nerds might know of this concept, and I don't want to get too technical or go over people's heads, but there is a tax called unrelated business income tax that can kick in to your IRA when it owns debt leveraged property. I'll just keep it real simple, okay? If your IRA buys property and there's debt on there, it's got to split a little bit of the profit with Uncle Sam based on the amount of debt, okay? But this can be a great strategy if you hold the property. Because here's how that tax is calculated. First, there's 2 incomes that we're talking about, your rental income and capital gains, okay? If you're not selling the property, you don't have to worry about capital gains. But on the rental income, once your IRA becomes a taxpayer in these situations, your IRA gets to use expenses and depreciation just like other taxpayers do. So once it becomes a taxpayer, it can use all those tax tricks. But you're only paying it on the net profit. Remember, you have a mortgage payment, you got property tax, you got all sorts of things that come with the property. So you're not really paying that much in tax because there's not that much net income. But again, this is a long-term play. So I've seen oftentimes the tax is almost silly how small the tax is. But then when you come to the capital gains piece of it, here's how the capital gains tax works when you talk about unrelated business income tax. Is they only look back, when you sell the property, they're only going to look back at the debt on the property in the past 12 months. They don't go to the beginning of time on this property. So in theory, I can buy a property in the name of my IRA with 95% debt on that property, as long as I hold that property, okay, and have the note paid off. If I sell it 12 months after that period, how much capital gains tax do I pay? 0. So I still come back to paying 0 capital gains tax as if I would have bought it all cash, as long as I hold the property till the note's paid off, which is, again, a great strategy, and why that client I mentioned earlier, it was great that he did 1 a year. And by the time that 15 years passes, all the properties will be owned free and clear. He'll have no capital gains tax, and he used $50,000 to buy 5 properties.
Incredible. And it's on an account that's, relatively a modest size. Mm-hmm. When he looks up some years from now, that'll be dramatically different.
And especially when you consider it's a self-directed Roth IRA.
Can't do it any better than that. I'm taking notes myself. Just a reminder for anyone, if you have some questions, definitely drop them in the chat. We might have time for 1 or 2 of them. But one of the questions we get when we're talking about this is like, Ed, look, you have a team of people. You guys are out there running a business. You're in this every day. If I'm someone who works at Motorola, or, I'm in the military maybe, or I'm in one of these situations, I may not have the time to do this. And so I wanted to give a couple of pointers about places where people can find these types of deals, if that's okay. And Nate, if we get short on time, you just
we're good.
Give me the look. So one of the things that I think is actually the most effective way to find deals like this is actually to go through MLS. One of the great things about MLS as a service, right, is these are all individuals who have raised their hands and said, hey, I'm open to selling this property. And so we would look for a couple of things on MLS if we're looking for a seller finance deal. First, look for properties that have been on the market for a long period of time. And what that might be in your market. Heck, we've looked at properties that have been on the market on and off for like 700 plus days. Do you think that seller is trying to figure something out? And let's approach them and have a conversation that's like, hey, maybe we do this or maybe we do that. Another opportunity is most MLS systems will list a preferred financing source. And that often will say something like VA or FHA or any of those things. Those drop downs often will list owner financing or seller financing as a possible seller financing as a financing approach. And then the last thing, and folks don't often think of this one, but often in the public remarks, so like the remarks that the agent enters that then gets syndicated out to Zillow and Redfin and others, they're going to say something like, seller may be open to some part of seller financing, even if they didn't remember to put the checkbox in at that possible financing. So we recently did that in a metro that we're looking at, and we found over 70 opportunities of where they've either explicitly said they'll take owner financing, or even in the comments, the agent has said maybe open to seller financing. If you can just convert one of those, pick up the phone and call, heck, 5 of them a week or 10 of them a week or something, you definitely don't have to be operating, we've got a bit of a machine with what we're doing, but you don't have to be at that scale to look for these opportunities. Any comments there?
No, I was just thinking of something. Now, I got to ask this question.
Sure.
Have you ever thought about, again, this is just a random thought that I had when you were saying that. Have you ever thought of looking up, seeing properties owned by IRAs? Because the way that you can look that up is just type FBO. And
yeah.
in the county assessor, and you can find all the properties owned by a custodian with the IRA. And based on your story earlier, where you were saying that oftentimes you find good deals where the person's already used to renting the property.
Yeah.
And you structured that deal to where the note on the property, the seller finance deal, gave him more money.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that might be a good target some of these self-directed IRA owners who might be tired of dealing with toilets and tenants and having their custodian pay all the bills. Maybe they'd be interested in converting that house ownership to a note.
I think that's a fantastic idea. In fact, we'll do a search on that and see. I'll report back.
Because
see you guys in
those
8
IRA
months.
Owners they just want to see the dollars coming into their IRA, and if they don't have to deal with the tenants and they're getting more, hey.
Nate did give you guys a secret out there. If you're operational in real estate and you're looking for lenders, one of the most important secrets is that FBO language in your county recorder's system.
Hidden trick.
Hidden trick. Okay. Other places for folks to find deals. I know I'm going to show my age a bit, but Craigslist is still a place where a lot of people will post properties, and demographically speaking, Craigslist is a place that traditionally older demographics are engaging, and traditionally folks who may be more open to this may be those who are, again, those tired landlords. So Craigslist is a place that I would look. One of the first books I ever read on real estate taught you to look at rental listings and call the rental listing and then ask them if they'd be open to taking payments over time for the property. So that's a strategy that still works here. Facebook Marketplace, of course. One place folks miss out on pretty often we see is these Facebook investment groups. So you and I originally met in some of these groups. And so I happened to know that we were coming to sit with you. So I typed in the words Phoenix Real Estate Investment, and all of these groups that we see on the right side. So they have one with 3.4 members, 7.6 members, 4.5 members. One of them had like 14 point something members. 14 point something thousand members. So these are all opportunities to be in front of large groups of people who are generally a little more savvy and ask the question very directly. I have X funds sitting in a retirement account looking to purchase three home portfolio. Who has something available? And if folks will be consistent about that posting, they'll begin to draw deals to themselves.
Yeah, I was going to say Facebook is still probably king out of the social media
Strongly
platforms for finding deals and connecting with other investors. I thought when you were saying, I'm going to show my age, I thought you were going to say Facebook, because all my nieces
also,
and nephews
yeah.
say Facebook is for old people.
Well, see, I don't even acknowledge that that's a problem, right? That's directly in my demographic.
But yeah,
so.
I do the same thing. I go on Facebook. I join the groups. I try to, participate in the groups, especially the big ones. Shout out to Jim Ingersoll. I haven't talked to Jim in a while. Jim has a Facebook group of investors of 300,000, I believe it now. It's tremendous. But there's so many savvy investors that are going there. You learn a lot, but you can sell deals, you can find deals. Facebook's great for that.
One other point you asked me earlier about finding an attorney in my market that can do this type of deal. Those Facebook groups are a fantastic source for specifically that question. Just rounding out where to find seller finance deals, though, your local RIAs. Most major metros have one, if not more, local RIAs, and those are a great opportunity to connect with investors. Strangely enough, sometimes there's groups of investors who only attend this RIA or that one, which I don't understand actually. But in any case, make sure you're attending multiple. If there is multiple RIAs in your market, make sure you're attending multiple ones. And then also meet up in other networking events. So, for example, in our home market, we host a weekly and a monthly meetup that's directly branded with CLT Buyers, and that would be a great place to meet not just us, but other friends of ours, other professionals of ours who are coming along.
And I would encourage you guys, if you guys are in Charlotte or just visiting Charlotte, look up Ed. If you're there on a Thursday, attend his office hours. I make my plans when I go to Charlotte to make sure that I'm there at least through Thursday or through Thursday night, so that I can attend Ed's office hours. It's great. There's young kids that come in to learn about real estate. You got the kid from high school that's learning about being a real estate investor. And how much does it cost?
It's free. Yeah, we don't charge for it. Right. What we believe about that is those relationships are going to be really valuable to us in the long run. And so every Thursday at our office from 3 to 5, we shut the office down and our team sits down and we talk about a whole variety of things. And we post those on our Instagram, what the topics are, and people are welcome to come.
And the thing I love that you guys share there is you don't just talk about home runs. You talk about the real crazy stuff that happens in real estate. And you talk about some of the just crazy things that you have to deal with on every deal.
I think what we're trying to do, and I won't stay here long, but I think what we're trying to do is we've got some really great friends who operate awesome YouTube channels, and a lot of our you talked about Pace Morby as an example. It's really easy to see the folks who have full machines that are up and running, but what we're trying to do in our office hours is to let people behind the curtain and say, hey, yes, there are home runs that happen in our business, and we've talked about them on this call. But there are also a lot of challenges that come with that, and you guys need to know about them. And hopefully, with our guidance and some of our friends, you can avoid some of those. So that's what we're trying to do. Okay, so that's seller financing. If you guys are looking for deals, these are great ways to find them. And then let's talk about the subject twos. So again, going to MLS, you can look at the long lead time properties. A key question when you're talking about that with the agent is, why hasn't this home sold? And they'll say something like, well, they owe $280,000, and so they've got to sell for $305 to just clear that debt out. That's an opportunity, and it's not going to be in the first conversation for sure, but it's an opportunity to say to that agent and then by default their client, hey, you have some options. If you want to get out of this home in Spartanburg and you want to go to Florida to be with your grandkids, but you've been trying to sell this house for 2 years, I can get you to Florida. And there's some options there. So that's one thing. Again, the idea of searching the public remarks, but look for the terms motivated or investor special. Those are two opportunities there. Again, Craigslist, we've talked about Facebook. So we've talked about some of those. The unique ones, tax delinquency. So find a list of properties in your target county that are delinquent on taxes. Even better if they're delinquent by a second year. That may be a pretty good indication that they're struggling to keep things current. And a lot of folks would say to me, well, if they have a mortgage and it's the taxes are being escrowed, then this wouldn't be the situation. There are people with mortgages out there where taxes are not escrowed, and that's the target there specifically. Those, again, we talked about those who are in foreclosure or the pre-foreclosure process. Properties held by estates, so commonly referred to as probate in the industry. And then There are teams like ours. There are other teams in specific metros that are operating what we refer to as a wholesale business. So that's when I find an opportunity, but it doesn't fit the criteria for me to buy. We'll often sell that or assign that contract at a profit. So look for local wholesalers. And there's also a handful of national wholesale companies that may be able to provide these deals as well. So
Awesome.
yeah, definitely. Those are opportunities. Open to any questions. I don't know if we've gotten anything in the chat from folks.
We do have a question. Let me go ahead and get this one for you. All right. Does a self-directed Roth IRA have to pay taxes on debt of a non-recourse loan?
So the short answer is yes. A self-directed Roth, a self-directed traditional, HSA, any of the IRA accounts are potentially subject to unrelated business income tax if it owns debt leverage property. But again, I always talk about this UBIT tax. It's just something to be aware of, not something to be scared of. Kind of like the due on sale clause. You just need to account for it. And oftentimes almost every time I've had a client go into a deal where they bought debt leverage property, and I ask, because I want to see the tax. Show me what the tax is. Let me see after your CPA crunches the numbers. Well, after you throw in depreciation, after you throw in expenses, and the tax is so small.
What's an example of a number you've seen?
Okay, so
like $240 in a month or a year?
Well, I'll say the example of my friend that bought 3 warehouse units with what, $6,000. So this was a subject to deal. Or not, sorry, seller finance deal. The owner was a widow. She had these 3 warehouses that she had to start managing or collecting payments from the renters after her husband passed away. She was not equipped to do that. She didn't need the money. She liked the monthly payments. She didn't need a bunch of cash. So my friend came in with $6,000. That's all he had in his Roth IRA. Structured it as a seller finance deal because she owned it free and clear. So he gave her $6,000 as a down payment, carried back a $94,000 note. Okay, the IRA is the borrower. The IRA, or he makes sure that there's renters. The tenants pay the IRA. The IRA pays the note payment. In that deal, he's highly debt leveraged, right? So just do the math. About 94% debt leverage, but he didn't have to pay a lot of tax on the rental income because, again, there's the note payment and there's all the things that he can apply. So the net income, if there's very little net income, then there's very little net tax. And when he sold the property, because here's what he ended up doing, he actually sold one of the warehouses, okay, which was enough to pay off the seller note, okay? And long story short, he now owns 2 warehouse units for that $6,000 that are worth about $200,000, tax-free, that continue to generate monthly rent. The unrelated debt finance income tax he had to pay when he sold that was about $9,000. That's it, okay? To acquire a $200,000 and he's in his 30s, guys. So he's got a Roth IRA with
long runway.
2 warehouses generating cash flow that'll generate cash flow for as long as he wants. And he only had to pay $9,000 in tax. So again, and that was at 94% debt leverage.
Right. And so you can use these tools with these accounts very, very effectively, have a relatively neutral position from a tax perspective because of some of the tools with real estate, the depreciation, the operational expenses, things like we talked about.
And back to the initial question, if you are going to do an investment where you're going to buy property with debt, I think it's better to do it in a Roth or an HSA, or even if you have an ESA for your kids, use that account too, because in a sense, you're only getting taxed once. If you're going to go into an investment and you know there's going to be a little tax, do it with an account that grows tax-free on the remaining income. It's better than doing it with a traditional IRA where you got to pay tax twice. You're not double taxed, but you could think about it like that. But there are strategies if you're self-employed. Here's food for thought. If you're self-employed, you're a real estate investor, you're a CPA, you're just somebody that has their own business. If you use a solo 401k, which also has a Roth component, if you use a solo 401k to buy debt leverage property, the solo 401k has a special exemption to that UDFI tax. You just don't have to pay it. So if you have the option, you're self-employed, use the solo 401k. You don't even have to worry about the tax.
Love it.
Learn something new every day.
Every day. I was taking notes this morning when you and I were talking.
Any other questions, T?
None right now. I did get a message from Aaron, so maybe we have anything that we could talk about on non-recourse loans, or maybe how we can go about your first deal in your IRA.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about I'm actually going to do a special collab. We're going to pre-record one specific to non-recourse loans. If you guys are looking for non-recourse lenders, there's a variety out there. If you guys want to, and this is good if you're looking to buy your first property and maybe you don't have the subject to deals, just waiting at your front doorstep. Don't let your IRA just sit there idle. There are banks that have loans that they'll give to your IRA. North American Savings Bank is probably the biggest lender out there. NASB.com is their website. First Western Federal, their website's myiralender.com. They're two of the bigger national outfits. But any bank can issue your IRA a loan as long as it's non-recourse. Most banks that are going to do non-recourse are not going to be Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. But I've seen a lot of clients get non-recourse loans from their community bank or their credit union because they have a good relationship with them that they'll create a loan package for the IRA. And as long as the IRA puts enough down, 30, 40% down, a lot of these lenders are fine having recourse only to the property because there's such a big safety net.
They still have the security.
Yeah, they have the security, which is the house. So, but if you're looking to buy your first deal, that could be a good way to get into a real estate deal in your IRA is by either A, going and getting financing from a bank, or doing some of the things that Ed's been talking about through creative strategies like seller financing subject to lease option. Understand it, lean on somebody that's an expert in it, especially an expert in your area, I would say. But if you can learn these tactics, you can own millions of dollars in an IRA or in real estate in an IRA with very little out of pocket.
And grow them pretty exponentially. It's pretty cool.
Tax-free.
Awesome. Yep. And I'm not sure if we touched on this one, but can the due on sale clause be triggered by certain types of transfers, like family members or upon death?
I think the question's kind of reversed, which is banks often will overlook certain types of transfers. Death is certainly one. There are specifically protected transfers for what are called estate planning purposes, and that's often when you see the property transferred into like some form of a trust. But generally speaking, the bank is either going to be they're going to be concerned about these types of transfers or they're not. Our experience is that as long as the debt's kept current, very few lenders become concerned about this type of debt. I do want to add one point that we have seen just for an effort in transparency. If the property has some type of down payment assistance lien against it from we see it in North Carolina as North Carolina Finance Agency, that specific debt, it's often very low, it's $10,000 or $12,000. There is an expectation that debt is paid off and generally cannot be taken subject to.
Great point. Great point. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks for having
sharing.
us. This is great.
This was awesome. You guys save this episode. It'll be up on YouTube come Friday. So this is a great one to revert back to. Just a reminder, none of this is tax, legal, or investment advice. This is just food for thought and ways that you can better structure your deals or think of new creative strategies so that you can own real estate in an IRA with very little out of the IRA or even outside of the IRA. I have clients that do it both. So thanks, Ed.
I think the thing you made a great point about was choosing which shelf you put it on is really a smart decision to make and can make dramatic differences of the performance of that investment over time.
So, and another thing I'll add to that is have tools in your tool belt. Ed just did a great job of giving you guys more tools in your tool belt. When you're looking at property, don't pass on ones just because there's not a bunch of equity in the property. It might be a great subject to deal for your IRA, but go into each investment with options, you'd say, and different strategies because those are where some of the best investments happen are the ones that other investors are passing on.
Last thing we'd say from our side is we'd love to invite you guys to follow us on socials. I think we're putting those up on the screen now. So if you if you want to see what the inside of a real estate business looks like in the day-to-day, jump on our Instagram, jump on our Facebook. It's all at CLT Buyers, and you'll see us acting silly out at properties and finding turtles and all the different things that we do from a day-to-day basis, but we'd love to see you guys there.
And if you guys are new to self-directed IRAs, make sure to go to our website, directedira.com, if you guys want to learn more about self-direction and the wonderful things you can do. Thank you guys. We'll see you guys on a next episode of Rethinking Your Retirement.